Lord of the Flies by William Golding is one of the most disturbing and psychologically powerful novels ever written. Published in 1954, the book explores human nature, civilization, fear, power, violence, morality, and the fragile line between order and chaos. Although the story focuses on a group of boys stranded on an island, the novel is not truly about children alone. It is about humanity itself. Golding wrote the novel after witnessing the horrors of World War II, and much of the book reflects his belief that violence and darkness are not limited to certain societies or individuals. Instead, he suggests that the potential for cruelty exists inside all human beings and that civilization may be thinner and more fragile than people like to believe. The story begins when a plane carrying British schoolboys crashes on a deserted tropical island during an unspecified war. No adults survive. The boys suddenly find themselves completely alone, free from normal rules, institutions, and authority. At first, the island seems almost magical. Beautiful beaches, fresh water, fruit trees, freedom from adult control. The boys initially treat the situation like an adventure. They are excited by the absence of rules and responsibility. But Golding gradually transforms this paradise into a nightmare, showing how quickly order can collapse when fear, ego, and violence take control. The first major theme of the novel is civilization versus savagery. The boys attempt to create structure by electing a leader, Ralph. Ralph represents order, cooperation, rationality, and democratic leadership. He focuses on practical survival, building shelters, maintaining the signal fire, and creating rules. The signal fire becomes one of the novel's most important symbols. It represents hope, rescue, connection to civilization, and collective responsibility. As long as the fire burns, there remains a path back to society. Another important character is Piggy, perhaps the most intellectually insightful boy on the island. Piggy is physically weak, socially awkward, and often mocked, but he consistently represents reason, science, logic, and mature thinking. His glasses become a crucial symbol because they create fire. Symbolically, they represent knowledge, intelligence, and technological power. Piggy understands that survival depends on cooperation and discipline, but the others often ignore him because they judge appearance more than wisdom. This reflects one of the novel's central truths. Societies frequently undervalue intelligence and rationality while rewarding confidence, aggression, or charisma. The novel's central antagonist is Jack Merridew. At first, Jack is simply proud, competitive, and frustrated after losing the leadership vote to Ralph. But as the story progresses, he becomes increasingly obsessed with power, domination, hunting, and violence. Jack represents humanity's primitive instincts, aggression, tribalism, bloodlust, and the desire for control. The conflict between Ralph and Jack symbolizes two competing forces inside human beings: the desire for order and cooperation, the desire for power and instinctual freedom. At first, the boys follow rules relatively well. They hold assemblies using a conch shell, which symbolizes democracy, communication, and civilized dialogue. Whoever holds the conch has the right to speak. This system creates structure and fairness. But as fear grows, respect for the conch weakens. This reflects another key lesson. Institutions and rules survive only as long as people collectively believe in them. The boys soon begin fearing a mysterious beast supposedly living on the island. At first, the beast seems like a physical threat, but gradually Golding reveals that the true beast is not external. It is internal. The fear, violence, cruelty, and darkness already existing inside the boys themselves. This idea becomes most explicit through Simon, one of the novel's most important characters. Simon represents innocence, spirituality, empathy, and deeper moral insight. Unlike the others, Simon realizes that the beast is not a monster hiding in the jungle. The real danger comes from human nature itself. One of the novel's most famous scenes occurs when Simon encounters the severed pigs head known as the Lord of the Flies. Covered in flies and rotting in the heat, the pig's head becomes a terrifying symbol of corruption, violence, and evil. During a hallucination-like moment, the Lord of the Flies seems to speak to Simon, revealing that evil cannot simply be hunted away because it exists inside humanity. This scene forms the philosophical heart of the novel. The title itself, Lord of the Flies, translates roughly to Beelzebub, a name associated with the devil. But Golding's point is not supernatural horror. The horror comes from ordinary human beings. Another major theme is the collapse of morality under fear and group psychology. As hunting becomes more important, Jack gains influence because he offers excitement, meat, power, and emotional certainty. The boys become increasingly tribal. They paint their faces, chant violently, and lose individual identity within the group. Face paint becomes symbolically important because it allows anonymity. When identity disappears inside crowds, personal responsibility weakens. Golding shows how group mentality can turn ordinary people toward cruelty they might never commit alone. This remains one of the novel's most timeless lessons. Civilized individuals can become dangerous when absorbed into fear-driven groups. The boys eventually split into factions. Ralph's group struggles to maintain order and rescue efforts. Jack's tribe embraces hunting, domination, and violence. The signal fire becomes neglected as primal desires take priority over long-term survival. This shift symbolizes how easily societies can sacrifice future well-being for immediate emotional gratification. Another major theme is power. Jack increasingly rules through fear rather than cooperation. He manipulates the boys by promising protection from the beast while also intensifying fear of it. This reflects how leaders throughout history often strengthen control by creating enemies and exploiting anxiety. Fear makes people easier to dominate. Another important lesson concerns the fragility of civilization. At the beginning, the boys seem civilized because they come from structured society. But once external systems disappear, deeper instincts emerge quickly. Golding challenges the optimistic belief that humans are naturally rational and peaceful. Instead, he suggests morality requires effort, structure, and conscious restraint. Without accountability, darkness can surface rapidly. One of the novel's most tragic moments is Simon's death. During a storm, the boys mistake Simon for the beast in a frenzy of fear and violence, killing him collectively. This scene is horrifying because the boys are not acting as individual monsters alone. They are overwhelmed by hysteria, crowd psychology, and primitive emotion. Golding shows how fear can destroy innocence and truth. Simon, the only boy who truly understood the beast, dies trying to bring clarity. Soon afterward comes another devastating moment, Piggy's death. As respect for reason collapses completely, Piggy is killed violently, and the conch shell shatters simultaneously. This symbolism is direct and powerful. The destruction of Piggy and the conch represents the destruction of logic, law, civilized dialogue, and moral order. After this point, the island descends almost fully into savagery. Ralph becomes hunted like an animal. Jack's tribe embraces total brutality. Ironically, the boys who once feared beasts become the beasts themselves. The ending of the novel is deeply significant. As the island burns in chaos, a naval officer suddenly arrives, drawn by the smoke from the fire. The boys are rescued, but the rescue is emotionally devastating rather than triumphant. The officer sees children behaving like savages. Ralph breaks down crying, mourning the loss of innocence and recognizing the darkness inside humanity. This ending matters because Golding does not offer easy optimism. The officer himself comes from a world engaged in global war. The violence on the island reflects the violence of civilization itself. Adults are not fundamentally different from the boys. The island becomes a miniature version of human society. Another major theme is innocence lost. At the beginning, the boys imagine freedom without adults as exciting. By the end, they confront death, cruelty, fear, and moral collapse. Growing up becomes not merely gaining knowledge, but discovering uncomfortable truths about human nature. The novel also critiques blind optimism about progress. Technology and education alone do not guarantee morality. Civilization may produce refinement externally while violence remains internally present. Golding argues that self-awareness and moral responsibility matter deeply because darkness cannot simply be eliminated through systems alone. How can someone apply the lessons of Lord of the Flies today? First, understand how fear can distort judgment. Second, recognize the dangers of mob mentality. Third, value reason and dialogue even during emotional conflict. Fourth, question leaders who manipulate fear for power. Fifth, remember that civilization depends on collective responsibility. Sixth, avoid losing individuality inside crowds or ideology. Seventh, recognize that self-control and morality require conscious effort. Another important lesson is self-awareness. The novel warns against believing evil exists only in other people. Human beings are capable of both compassion and cruelty. Ignoring this complexity makes societies vulnerable. Golding's message is uncomfortable but powerful. The line between civilization and savagery exists inside every person. The final summary of Lord of the Flies is this: civilization is fragile, fear is powerful, and human beings carry both light and darkness within them. Without responsibility, empathy, reason, and moral restraint, societies can collapse into violence more quickly than expected. In the end, Golding reminds readers that the greatest dangers often do not come from monsters outside us, but from the parts of ourselves we refuse to confront.